At around 2 a.m., the place was mostly cloaked in darkness, with only a few dim lights sprinkled here and there down the hallways. I was stretched out on my back in my cramped 10 by 10 cell, hands tucked behind my head, just staring up at the shadows shifting and flickering on the ceiling. Sleep should have come by now, but instead, my mind kept circling around memories I'd have preferred to leave buried. That's when I heard footsteps. I started counting, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then he appeared. His face wore that same blank, hardened look everyone here had. Just another guard making his rounds, no interest in eye contact or small talk. I wasn't sure if he even noticed me lying there, but it didn't matter anyway. He was free, and I was trapped in here. As he passed my cell, I stopped counting. No point, he wouldn't come around again for another hour and a half. I shifted my eyes back to the ceiling, already thinking about what I'd do once I got out. Just 5 days left, and I'd be done for good. 7 months down on a 1-year sentence, with my job waiting on the outside, but everything else. That was bound to be different. My older brother James had been keeping my car running, covering my bills, and keeping a close eye on what was left of my bank account. Angry? Oh, I was beyond angry, but I'd learned to lock that feeling away, for now, at least. It's easy to see why guys doing 10, 20 years come out looking empty inside. They lose a part of themselves in here. This place was no high-security lockdown like the one upstate, but even so, you had to lay low if you wanted to get through it. I closed my eyes, hoping for at least a few hours of sleep, wishing I could be back in my old bedroom, with the blackout shades keeping everything pitch dark. "I'll pick you up next Tuesday," James had told me last week in the visiting room. We'd talked through a pane of plexiglass, hopefully for the last time. "Anything special you want to eat your first night out?" He'd asked, grinning. "A big steak." "Medium rare," I'd answered. He chuckled. "Mike, that's too easy. Thought you'd make me work for it." He'd said I'd be staying with him and his wife Karen until I could get back on my feet. My house was pretty much cleared out, with hardly any food or furniture, so a place to regroup was what I needed. "It's no Ritz," he added, smiling, "but it's clean, and you'll have your freedom." I didn't return his smile, just mumbled, "Thanks," but he cut me off. "Come on. We're family. It's what we do." James knew how much this all meant to me. "Don't worry about Mom and Dad," he went on. "They'll come around once things calm down." But we both knew that wasn't likely to happen anytime soon. "See my kids?" I'd asked him. 2 weekends back, over at Mom and Dad's," he'd replied. "Emily's pretty much the same, but Max, he's got himself one of those trendy bowl cuts. Awful." I told him straight up. James laughed as he told the story, but it didn't hit me in the same way. You know what he said to me? He told me I wasn't his dad, so he didn't have to listen. I almost lost it right there, but Mom was watching. "You're gonna have your hands full with him." I knew Max wouldn't dare say something like that to me. My son and daughter would be staying with Jennifer once I got out, and I wasn't rushing to change that. The divorce was done, but I still held half the house, and she owed me nearly $65,000 to buy me out. She'd probably already emptied the safety deposit box, swiping the CDs and bonds, but my lawyer had a list on file to sort that all out. Patricia and that backstabbing friend of mine, Nick, had sure done a number on me. But I wasn't about to get caught off guard like that again. Lying there, I sifted through memories, readying myself for whatever lay ahead. The moment I got out, I'd start piecing together a fresh start. This whole nightmare would be behind me, and I'd move forward, no matter how long that might take. Before landing here, life seemed solid, or at least, I thought it was. A few weeks before things blew up, a couple of friends had dropped hints. I brushed it off, thinking they either assumed I already knew or just didn't want to get tangled up in it. Looking back now, it was obvious no one wanted to step in. Jennifer and I had 12 years together, 2 kids, a decent house, and stable jobs. Sure, we argued sometimes, but I loved her. The thought of her betraying me never even crossed my mind. We weren't big on socializing, just kept close to a few couples in the neighborhood. Most of them were married as long as we had been, and all had kids except Nick and his wife, Linda, who'd been trying for ages. Jennifer probably knew all the details, but I stayed out of their business. Linda started drinking heavily about a year ago. At first, she was just quieter than usual, but soon it got ugly. Nick didn't drink much, so he'd end up looking after her. It'd start with her sweetly asking, "Nick, honey, can you get me another drink?" By the end of the night, she'd be barking orders at him, and he'd practically be carrying her out. Sad as it wasn't my problem, it was a mess between Nick and Linda. One of these days, Linda's going to embarrass herself real bad, I'd muttered to Jennifer once as we got ready for bed. Tonight, she nearly passed out a few times, and Scott and Jessica ducked out early when she started coming on to Scott, asking him to help her get undressed. Jennifer just shook her head. She's miserable over not having kids, but blaming Nick doesn't solve anything. I told her they could always adopt, but she won't listen. She's convinced it's all on Nick. They'll either work it out or go their separate ways, I said, already dreading our next night out with them. Jennifer seemed hopeful. I'll try talking to her this week, she said. Maybe she'll hold it together for at least one night. But Linda didn't hold back. "Waiter, how's a girl supposed to get a drink around here?" she slurred, already starting to lay into Nick. I could see he'd had enough, so I jumped in. "Come on, Linda, didn't you promise me a dance?" I didn't give her a choice and led her to the dance floor. We danced through 3 songs while Jennifer stayed back, talking with Nick, who looked dead tired. Near the hallway, Linda mumbled something about needing the restroom and stumbled off. After a while, I started to wonder, so I asked 2 women going in to check on her. "Is she wearing a bright yellow dress?" one of them asked, glancing out of the restroom. When I nodded, she sighed. "She's passed out in one of the stalls. I can wait here if you want to help her." I went in, lifted Linda up to the sink, and splashed some cold water on her face. She came to briefly but slumped back again. Half carrying her, I brought her back to the table where Nick sat, looking torn between anger and embarrassment. "Nick, let me help you get her to the car," I said. "She's totally out of it and isn't waking up anytime soon." As I held up a very drunk Linda, Nick looked at me, trying to hide his frustration. "Mike, I've got it. You can sit down." "It's not the first time, but it's definitely the last," he muttered. Ignoring his protests, I carried her out to the car while he grabbed her purse and muttered a quick goodbye. I laid her across the back seat, patted Nick on the shoulder, and said, "I'm sorry, man." There wasn't much else to say. "Thanks for helping," he replied, sounding worn out. "I'm at my breaking point. I don't know what to do anymore. You both might need some help, counseling or something. Jennifer and I are here if you need us," I offered, even though I knew his response would be just polite agreement. I doubted they'd hold it together much longer. Turns out, I wasn't too far off, but none of us could have guessed what would happen next. 3 weeks later, just after 10:30 on a Thursday night, we heard sirens and saw the flashing lights at the end of our block. Jennifer and I were both still up, and she started to head outside, but I stopped her. "Stay here, Jennifer. I'll go see what's going on." When I joined the crowd, I saw the fire department's rescue team working to pry open the driver's door of Nick's car. "Is Nick okay?" I asked one of our neighbors nearby. "It's not Nick," she replied. "It's Linda." They were fighting, and she stormed off, grabbed his keys, and drove away. She didn't get far, crashed into a parked car going about 40 miles an hour. Just then, an ambulance pulled up. Paramedics loaded Linda onto a stretcher and sped off, with Nick close behind. The front door of their house was left wide open, lights blazing, and furniture knocked over. I called Jennifer to let her know, then walked over to Nick's place to lock up, leaving a note saying I had his keys. "How's Linda?" Jennifer asked when I got home. I shook my head. "Not good. She wasn't wearing a seatbelt and swerved just before she hit the car. The airbag went off, but she smashed her head against the window hard enough to shatter it. She was probably going around 35. Nick's with her at the hospital. We'll wait until tomorrow to go. He's got enough to handle tonight." We tried to sleep that night, but worry kept us both awake. At 11 a.m. the next day, my phone rang, and Jennifer's voice was filled with panic. "Michael, Linda's on life support. Nick's in pieces, and he needs someone with him. I'm leaving work, meet me at the hospital." On my way over, I stopped to grab some food for us and called Jennifer's parents to see if they could pick up our kids after school. When I got to the hospital, Jennifer and several others were gathered around Nick, doing their best to comfort him. "How's she doing?" I asked Jennifer quietly. She shook her head with a grim expression. "It's not looking good," she said. "The doctor told Nick there's barely any brain activity, and he's hardly spoken since." I sat beside Nick. "Are you holding up okay?" I asked, knowing it was a lousy question under the circumstances. "She's not waking up, Michael," he choked out. "The doctor's asking if I'd consider taking her off life support. But how do I even make that choice? She's my wife, not just a machine to turn off." His voice cracked with frustration and grief. "Why can't they fix her? Isn't that what they're supposed to do?" Just then, Linda's parents showed up and went into her room with Nick. A mix of crying, anger, and blame followed. Linda's father lashed out, blaming Nick for what had happened, his heart shattered and unable to see past his pain. About 20 minutes later, the doctor came out with her parents. They were devastated, knowing they'd never be able to talk to their daughter again. That night, we picked up the kids and went home, shaken to the core. I kept thinking, I hope I never have to make that kind of decision for Jennifer or anyone else I care about. 2 days later, with Nick, Linda's parents, and the doctor all gathered around, they took Linda off life support. She slipped away quietly. We stayed to comfort Nick as much as we could. Whatever her issues had been, Linda was loved, and now she was gone. At her funeral, everyone only spoke about the good times. Nick took it hard, withdrawing from everything. He took a month off and went back east, and I promised him I'd keep an eye on things until he returned. One evening, as Jennifer and I were getting ready for bed, I pulled her close and said, "You know I love you, right?" These past few weeks had worn us both down, and the pain of losing Linda still lingered. "If anything like that ever happens to me, let me go. I wouldn't want to be kept alive by machines." "Don't say things like that, Michael," she said, shaking her head. "That could never happen to us." A few weeks after that, Nick came back. Jennifer helped him sort through Linda's belongings, and over the next few months, he seemed to be healing bit by bit. We started inviting him to get-togethers and even set him up on a few dates, though none of them really went anywhere. Life slowly started to get back to normal, or so it seemed. 6 months later, Nick finally looked like himself again, laughing and joining us at gatherings. Seeing him find some happiness again, a sliver of peace after all that pain, was a relief to us all. Looking back, I wonder if I missed the signs. Jennifer and I were still close, and a lot between us hadn't really changed, but something felt off. After a few months of sensing it, I finally asked if there was anything on her mind. "Oh, nothing serious, Michael." "Why do you ask?" she replied, almost too casually. "You just seem a little distant these days." "Everything's fine," she smiled, brushing it off. "Maybe I just haven't been giving you enough attention. If you want more, all you have to do is ask." She laughed and used a word I'd never heard her say before, lovemaking. The word felt strange coming from her, but I pushed the odd feeling aside, kissed her, and told myself it was nothing. But I'll never forget that Friday, August 20th, the day everything fell apart. Jennifer called me at work, saying the kids would be staying with her parents for the weekend and asked when I'd be home. "I'll make sure I'm back early," I told her. She didn't say much more, just to let her know when I'd arrive. It was 3:30, about an hour and a half before I could leave, but my thoughts were already racing, imagining a quiet weekend together. I drove home carefully, sticking to the speed limit, but still made it back in a record 28 minutes. When I pulled up, I noticed 2 cars in the driveway. One of them was Nick's. That should have been my first warning sign. "Hey honey, I'm home," I called out, stepping inside. Nick and Jennifer were both in the kitchen, and there was a thick tension in the air. "Hey, Nick," I said slowly. "What's going on?" "Michael, I need to talk to you." "Please, have a seat," Jennifer said, her voice shaky. I stayed standing, crossing my arms. "I'll stand." "Michael, I wanted you to hear this from me before you get the papers." Confused, I asked, "What papers, Jennifer?" She took a step back, almost trembling. "The divorce papers," she said quietly. My heart pounded as I tried to process her words. "What are you talking about, divorce papers?" I looked hard at Nick. "You need to leave, Nick. This is between me and my wife." Then a sickening realization started to settle in as I looked back and forth between them. "Nick, get out. Now." "Michael, this involves him too," she insisted. I clenched my fists, anger boiling over. "If you don't leave now, Nick, you'll be leaving in a body bag." He gave me a nervous glance and quickly headed for the door. I turned to Jennifer. "You and I need to talk. Now." "There's nothing to talk about, Michael," she said, her tone cold. "I'm in love with Nick." "I'm sorry." My voice trembled with rage. "How long has this been going on?" Even before Linda passed, Nick interjected, his voice icy. "You have no idea, Michael." "Oh, I know enough," I snapped. "While I was being there for you, you were sleeping with my wife. Get out of my house, both of you." "Michael, it's my house too," Jennifer argued. "Not anymore. Get out," I yelled. She looked at me for a moment, then finally said, "Fine. I'll come back for my things when you've calmed down." "You'll be dead before then," I muttered as they left. After they were gone, I lost control. A couple of beers and a few smashed pieces of furniture later, the house was as torn up as I felt. I gathered all of Jennifer's belongings, threw them out on the lawn, and turned the sprinklers on full blast for the next 4 hours. Afterward, I locked up, had a few more beers, and drank until the world faded away. The next morning, her things were gone. The anger was still simmering, and I didn't call anyone, though I was sure the neighbors were well aware by then. I tried reaching out to Jennifer's mom to ask about the kids, but she was cold with me. "Jennifer already picked them up last night, Michael. Don't start playing games. She was here picking up her things. Now put my kids on the phone." She hung up on me, and when I tried calling back, she didn't answer. Enraged, I canceled every credit card we shared and pulled as much cash as I could from the bank. I made myself some coffee, ate, and ran through my plan for the day: change the garage code, install new locks, and move anything valuable over to James's place. Just as I was getting ready to leave, the doorbell rang. Peeking through the peephole, I saw a man holding a large envelope. He waited a bit, then left when I didn't answer. I called James and his wife, Karen, explained everything that had gone down, and asked them to keep it under wraps. Then I headed to Home Depot to pick up some new locks. On my way back, I saw Nick's car parked in my driveway, and Jennifer was loading stuff into it. Rage flared up inside me, and instead of passing by, I floored it, screeching into the driveway and slamming into the back of his car. Nick darted inside just as I hit his car, shoving it up against the closed garage door. I reversed, backed up about 15 feet and rammed it again, driving his car straight through the garage door. My hood started steaming, and my engine made a horrible groaning sound, but I managed to back up one last time, just a few feet away before my car finally stalled. With my heart pounding, I grabbed an aluminum bat from the garage and started smashing his windows and windshield. I was about to rip open Nick's door when I heard loud voices shouting behind me. "Drop the bat and put your hands on your head." I did as they said, dropping the bat and kneeling. They cuffed me and put me in the patrol car. Nick, looking terrified and pale, climbed out of his car. My eyes met Jennifer's tear-streaked face as she talked to the police, and I couldn't help but give a bitter smile before they drove me away. At the station, they booked me, and I used my one call to reach James. Since it was the weekend, I spent 2 nights in jail before appearing in court on Monday. I pleaded not guilty, and the judge set my bail, which James paid later that day. "Michael, they're talking about attempted homicide or at least assault with a deadly weapon," James warned. "I know," I muttered. "But first things first, take me to the bank. Jennifer's probably cleared out the accounts, but I need to check." Sure enough, the cash was gone, though the CDs and bonds were still intact. However, I was hit with a court order blocking me from touching any of it. I called Jennifer, and to my surprise, she picked up. "You couldn't have left me $5. "You really are cheap," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "I needed that money for the kids and myself," she replied coldly. "Doesn't Nick make enough? I've got mortgage payments to worry about, too. Maybe I should just make things easy and warm the house up with a nice fire," I shot back, half joking. "Michael, stop talking crazy. I'm sorry things ended up this way, but you're not helping yourself," she said, as if her sympathy would make any of this easier. "I'll accept it when my kids are back home," I snapped. "I can't, especially after what you've done. Once things settle down, you can see them, but you won't be seeing me or Nick." Her last words were, "From now on, talk to my lawyer." Then the line went dead. I muttered to the empty dial tone, "Jennifer, you don't know how sorry you're going to be for all of this." At my next court hearing, my attorney argued temporary insanity, saying I'd acted out of shock after Jennifer's sudden betrayal. Jennifer and Nick painted themselves as victims and asked for a restraining order. The judge asked me about my threat to Nick, and I admitted I'd warned him, though maybe not in those exact words. "How would you feel if a friend did that to you?" I tried to explain, but my lawyer shot me a look that said I should shut up. "Michael, don't say a word," he whispered. "We're trying to show you didn't know what you were doing. Let me handle it." He was right. My boss, Mike, testified on my behalf, describing me as a dependable employee who never lost his cool. After he was done, the case wrapped up, and we waited on the judge's decision. Back at work, Mike made a joke, offering to hire someone to make Nick and Jennifer disappear. I laughed it off, though the thought crossed my mind. But in the end, I was still trapped in the legal mess. 6 months and $12,000 later, my divorce was finalized. Jennifer got half of everything, including the proceeds from the house sale. She claimed her jewelry was missing, accusing me of taking it. I countered, saying my things had vanished too, and hinted that she'd taken it all herself. Are they serious? I'm the one who ended up in jail. I yelled at my attorney when I heard the judge's sentence. "Michael, it could have been a lot worse," he replied, calm as ever. "You could have been facing manslaughter charges. With good behavior, you'll be out in under 8 months, and in 2 years, your record can be cleared. Just serve your time, get out, and leave it all behind." Easy for him to say, but the thought of spending every hour of every day in jail wasn't something I looked forward to. I tried to appeal, but it went nowhere. Within a year, my whole life had crumbled, all thanks to Jennifer and Nick. "Your job will be here when you get out," Mike, my boss, assured me before I turned myself in. "Just keep your cool, stay out of trouble." After one last visit with my kids, I reported to the county facility. James made sure my inmate account stayed funded, though most of the stuff I could buy there was junk. With no phone or computer, I poured my thoughts onto paper and made bi-weekly collect calls to James, my mom, and the kids to stay in touch. During one visit, James said, "I've got someone working on your car with the insurance money, and I'm handling your yard upkeep." I put new deadbolts on the house, too. Jennifer came by to grab the rest of her and the kids' clothes, but she didn't touch the furniture. I told her she needed a court order if she wanted anything else. I was thankful James was looking out for me. Jennifer let my parents see the kids every other Sunday, though she threw in some nasty remarks about their jailbird father. She hinted at setting strict conditions for when I got out, but my parents kept the peace to make sure they could stay in contact. 7 days later, I got confirmation of my visitation rights, every other weekend, a full month in the summer, and shared holidays. I notified my boss I'd need a week to settle back in after my release. That day came faster than expected, and I was thrilled to swap the orange jumpsuit for street clothes. James was waiting for me, and we headed straight to the nearest bar. "To freedom," I said, clinking bottles with him before downing the first of 3 beers. "Karen's got a steak dinner with all the fixings ready for us," he said. "You'll stay with us a few nights while you sort things at your place. It's still up for sale, but no offers yet. Jennifer wants to lower the price, but she needs your go-ahead." Feeling a hint of control returning, I smiled. "All the furniture's still there, but I did get rid of the master bedroom set, like you asked," he added. Dinner was incredible. I ate more that night than I had in months, enjoying every bite. I drank a bit too much, vaguely remembering 5 or 6 beers and 3 glasses of wine. When I finally came to, it was past 10 a.m. the next day. By 11, I managed to get myself up and headed to the bathroom to clean up. In the kitchen, I found a note from James. "If you're reading this, you made it through last night. There's coffee ready, and plenty in the fridge. The spare bathroom has soap, a razor, shaving cream, a toothbrush, and toothpaste. If you need anything else, we'll pick it up tonight. The keys to your car and house are on the rack by the back door. Don't do anything stupid. See you around 5:30. James knew me well. I downed 2 cups of coffee and managed an English muffin. After a hot shower and shave, I finally started to feel human again. James had set out a fresh set of clothes, and within an hour, I was on my way to the house. Sitting in my repaired car out front, I sat there for a good 10 minutes, letting the memories roll over me. Taking a deep breath, I noticed the new deadbolt on the door. With a steady hand, I turned the key and stepped inside. The place was a disaster. Clothes were scattered all over, the kitchen was trashed, and the fridge still held expired food. By the sink, I saw the dented wall, a mark from that night when my fist had met a stud. Rubbing my knuckles, I couldn't help but recall that moment. Upstairs, the kids' closets were practically empty, with only a few forgotten knickknacks left behind. My bedroom felt hollow too, just my dresser and a small pile of clothes remained. Dark spots on the carpet marked where her bed and dresser had been, a stark reminder that this room would need a complete transformation before I could feel comfortable there again. The whole house was in need of work before it could go on the market, but I wasn't in any rush to sell. I made a list of repairs, deciding I wanted everything done right, though I didn't plan on doing it all myself. At the bank, I confirmed that she'd emptied the lockbox. They even had video evidence, so my attorney filed a motion to recover the contents. The court ordered Jennifer to return everything she'd taken. "She's offering to trade her share of the house for your share of the CDs and bonds," my attorney said. I told him to have her return everything or face arrest for noncompliance. "She can be as upset as she wants, my job is to protect your interests, that's why I'm here," he assured me. Back at the house, I took inventory of what I still had and called a local contractor to fix the walls. I also reached out to Grace, who ran a cleaning service, to tackle the kitchen and dining room, which had taken the brunt of my anger that night. With the utilities still on, I could move back in as soon as I got a new bed. After a bit of shopping, I found a decent queen-sized mattress set for $900. At least I wouldn't be sleeping on the same bed my ex had shared with someone else. Hank, the contractor, showed up that Saturday morning to give me an estimate. "Your walls are pretty solid," he chuckled, looking at the dent I'd left. "Must have hurt when you punched that stud." "Just patch up the holes and give it a fresh coat of paint," I replied. "Nothing fancy." "How about $200? "That's my price, take it or leave it," he said with a grin. "By the way, after that thing with Nick's car, a lot of the guys around here think highly of you now." I thanked him, and he got to work. Within 6 weeks, my CDs and bonds were back in the bank, the house was patched up and cleaned, and life started to feel almost normal again. When the kids came to stay for their first weekend, it was awkward at first. I broke the ice by saying, "I know things feel a little strange, but this is still your home. Say whatever's on your mind. I've got a thick skin now, nothing you say could shock me. Dad, we love you." "We're sorry about what Mom did," Max said, with Emily nodding in agreement. "We didn't know about Nick until she told us we'd be moving to his house. We're still not happy about it." "Look," I told them, "there wasn't much I could do. Even if it wasn't for Nick, your mom and I wouldn't be getting back together. What we had is over. But I'm still your dad, and I'll always love you. I'm here for you." We hugged, ordered pizza, and watched a movie. I wanted to vent about their mother, but I held back. That first weekend felt like a win, we managed to feel like a family again, even if it was different. I took Max out for a decent haircut, and bit by bit, life started to move forward. I got back to work, kept a small social circle, and focused on the kids. Max got into soccer, and Emily dove into dance classes, keeping me on my toes. Everyone, except for my brother, kept saying I should let go and start fresh. "You're still young," they'd say. "You'll find someone new, get married again, and build a new life." I'd just shake my head and reply, "Forget it. I wasted 14 years on her. If I want to stay mad, that's my right." None of them had been through what I had these past 2 years. Sometimes you need that pound of flesh to make the pain fade. In one way or another, that was what I intended to get. Jennifer kept pressing me to lower the price of the house. "It won't sell in this market unless we drop it by at least $20,000, she argued. "If you're willing to give up $20,000 from your half, then fine. Otherwise, the price stays," I shot back. Eventually, we divided the bonds and CDs. She burned through her share, buying a new car and taking a vacation with Nick, while I stashed mine, building up a solid nest egg. Then, about 8.5 months after I'd been released, I heard that Nick's house had caught fire. While he and Jennifer were at Max's soccer game, someone had drenched the electrical box behind the house with gasoline. The entire back section was wrecked, and the house was without power. The next day, 2 officers showed up at my door to bring me in for questioning. I kept my answers straightforward. "I was at a neighborhood party with at least 10 people who saw me there," I said. "Michael, you were just a block away. You could have done this," one officer pressed. "Then prove it," I replied, calm as ever. Finally, I got up and told them, "Charge me, let me go, or I'm calling my lawyer." They let me go but warned me they'd be watching. In my mind, I checked off a box, 1 down, 2 to go. With Jennifer and Nick's house unlivable, I offered to take the kids while repairs were underway, which could take months. Jennifer wasn't thrilled but didn't put up a fight. "Michael, I know you did it, no matter what the police say," she accused one night as she picked up the kids. "I have no idea what you're talking about," I replied. "I was with our friends. Shame you and Nick aren't welcome anymore. Maybe I could put in a good word for you." "Don't bother. We wouldn't go even if they begged us, she snapped, bitterness all over her face. Well, at least you have each other, and that's all that counts, for now, I said, giving her a grin. What's that supposed to mean? She asked, eyes wide. Nothing, just that you're both lucky to have one another, I replied, smiling both on the inside and out. The kids seemed to prefer spending more time with me, which didn't sit well with Jennifer or Nick. From what the kids told me, there'd been some heated arguments, with Max standing up to Nick and telling him he wasn't his father. Jennifer blamed me, accusing me of stirring things up. I set her straight. Jennifer, I don't badmouth you. You're their mother, and I've told them to respect you. As for Nick, he's a traitor lucky to still be breathing, but beyond that, he's fine. She gave me a look that could kill. He's good to your kids, so quit putting him down, she demanded. That's not happening. Nick means nothing to me, and I'd gladly dance on his grave someday, I replied with an icy smile. Her face turned red with fury. Michael, so help me. What are you going to do, Jennifer? Cheat on me, divorce me, throw me in jail, and make my life a living hell? Oh, right, you already did all that. You can't hurt me anymore. Now go back to your husband and leave me be. Without another word, she stormed off. Hard to believe I'd once loved her. Meanwhile, work was going well. Within weeks, I was back to full speed, and Mike had me take on 4 more accounts. With the kids and an empty house, I had the time. After getting to know my new clients, I planned 2-day trips to each site to get a feel for their operations. 3 of the accounts were smooth, but K&G Enterprises was a tougher nut to crack. They were overhauling their manufacturing process, which meant I'd need to visit monthly to stay up to speed. The assigned engineer was sharp but arrogant and stubborn, which made it a struggle to get the data we needed. Mike, if they don't get me the data I need, their entire system's going to fall apart, I warned him. In response, Mike brought in someone to bridge the gap, a process engineer named Natalie Stevenson, who'd been with K&G Enterprises for 5 years. She extended her hand for a firm shake, introducing herself with a confident smile. Natalie and I worked well together, and she was quick to get me what I needed. As we neared the end of the first project phase, I suggested a dinner to thank her. Natalie, I'd like to treat you and your husband to dinner as a thank you. The Westin, where I'm staying, has a great restaurant. How does 6 o'clock sound? She agreed, and we set the time. I left the plant by 4:30, caught up on emails, and got to the restaurant early. When Natalie arrived solo, I was taken aback. Where's your husband? I asked. I'm not married, she laughed. Why do you ask? Oh, sorry, I just assumed, I replied, glancing at the rings on her finger. She smiled knowingly. I wear these to keep things professional. People tend not to hit on a married woman, so I avoid any uncomfortable situations. Plus, married people are often seen as more stable and get promoted faster. How do you explain it at company events? I asked. I just say he's out of town, she shrugged. After a while, people stopped asking. We laughed, and over dinner, I shared a little about what I'd been through in the last 2 years. Wow, that's brutal, she said, shaking her head. What you went through is rough. Tell me about it. I'm trying to move on, though. Revenge was still on my mind, but I knew rebuilding was part of moving forward, too. You're young, Michael, and there are plenty of women who'd be lucky to be with a guy like you, she said with a warm smile. Maybe, but trusting again isn't easy. Well, you asked me out, she teased. You and your husband, I corrected. If I weren't married, would you still have asked, she asked, her eyes twinkling. Probably, I admitted. You're easy to talk to, not like my ex. Thanks, I think, she laughed. Dinner went well, and I left town the next day, planning to return in a month. I told her to call me if anything came up, and we kept in touch by phone and email. Soon, every time I was in town, we'd meet up for dinner, and I even started feeling comfortable seeing her most nights when I was there. Trust was still a hurdle, but I was working on it. After a few months, things between us moved to the next level. I was finally ready to open up and let someone in again. Maybe, just maybe, life was starting to feel normal. One evening, Natalie mentioned a conflict on Wednesday, and I didn't think much of it. I decided to try a new restaurant while I was in town. After several visits, I'd hit most of the local places, but I found a Korean spot about 25 minutes out and decided to give it a shot. I ordered a beer and a sampler platter, settling in to relax. Then I heard her laugh. There was Natalie, sitting with another man, holding his hand. It was painfully obvious this wasn't just a friendly dinner. My appetite disappeared. I finished my beer, paid the tab, and walked out. The next day, I avoided her and ate lunch alone. By 3 p.m., she was back, chatting and acting flirty. "So, you took care of your conflict last night?" I asked, casually. "Yep, and tonight, I'm all yours," she replied, smiling. I locked eyes with her. "I found a cozy Korean place last night with a sampler platter. Sound familiar?" Her face drained of color. "Michael, I can explain." "No need," I cut her off. "I've already dealt with one liar. I don't need another." I turned and walked away, cutting my trip short. After a week of ignoring her emails, she gave up. Mike ended up assigning me a new contact, a guy this time. My trust issues, once on the mend, were now back in full force, courtesy of Natalie. Then, 3 months later, I got an unexpected early Christmas gift. Nick had been hit by a car while crossing the street. Witnesses said it was a black four-door car with tinted windows. As it happened, it matched the description of my black Toyota. Saturday night, 2 officers showed up at my door. My neighbor, Brad, was out front and gave me a curious look as they approached. "Mr. McVeigh, we'd like to have a word," one of the officers said. "Sure, no problem," I replied, giving Brad a nod. "I'll catch up with you later," I told him before turning back to the officers. "Mr. McVeigh, do you own a black Toyota Camry?" the other officer asked. "Yeah." "Why?" I replied, trying to lighten the mood. "Did I get a parking ticket or something?" They didn't crack a smile. "Is the car here?" the first officer asked. "Yeah, it's in the garage." "What's this about?" I asked, a little more serious. They asked to take a look, so I opened up the garage. One officer pulled out a camera and started snapping photos of the front right bumper. "Mind explaining these scratches and marks?" he asked, looking at me intently. "No idea. It's an 8-year-old car, nicks and scratches are part of the deal," I said. They didn't respond, so I pressed them. "So what's going on here? Why are you interested in my car?" "Mr. McVeigh, there was a hit-and-run incident yesterday, and witnesses described a black sedan with tinted windows, similar to yours." "Like mine and half the cars in this town," I replied, feeling a twinge of irritation. "Did anyone get the license plate? Or see me driving?" The officer hesitated. "Witnesses only saw the vehicle." "Well, as you can see, there's no real damage on the front," I said, motioning toward my car. "I can account for my whereabouts all day yesterday." "So why are you coming after me?" "Your history with the victim and past threats led us here," one officer replied. "Thanks for cooperating," they said as they turned to leave. "Wait," I called after them. "Who was hit?" "Nick," the officer answered without looking back. "Is he dead?" I asked, barely able to hide a grin. "No, but he's in critical condition," the officer said, glancing over his shoulder as they walked away. I went inside, opened a bottle of wine, and ordered a pizza. I ended up finishing most of the pizza and the entire bottle of wine, savoring what felt like a little celebration. The neighborhood buzzed with gossip about Nick, Some folks felt bad for him, while others thought he'd gotten exactly what he deserved. Me? I was on cloud 9. 2 days later, things took a sudden turn. Nick died. I showed up at his funeral looking sharp in a new suit, with a fresh haircut and polished shoes. I'd even had my car washed and waxed for the occasion. The funeral home wasn't exactly packed, but plenty of people lingered outside. As I walked in, conversations faded. I ignored the guest book and made my way straight down the aisle. Jennifer looked horrified, but my kids flashed me small, uncertain smiles. Jennifer tried to block me from getting to the casket, but I was prepared for this moment. When I reached Nick, I leaned over and spat on his face, enough that it dribbled down onto his shirt. Jennifer let out a scream, hurling every name in the book at me. I didn't bother hiding my smirk. 2 down, 1 to go, I whispered to her. She froze, terror mixing with her tears. I warned you, I said quietly and walked out of the stunned, silent funeral home. Over the next month, the police questioned me twice more at Jennifer's urging. She kept telling them that even if it wasn't my car, I still had something to do with it. The driver was never found, and eventually, the whole thing faded from people's minds. So when a patrol car pulled up to my driveway later on, I was already prepared. I locked up the house and waited as they approached. Mr. McVeigh, do you know Richard Collins? A detective asked, holding up a photo. Sure do, I replied, pushing the picture back. I hired him to keep an eye on my ex-wife. He's been on and off the job for about a month now. Why did you hire Mr. Collins to watch your ex-wife? The detective asked, his tone thick with sarcasm. Ever since she got involved with her now-deceased husband, trouble seems to follow her. My kids live with her, so I hired Collins to keep them safe, especially at night. Well, your ex-wife reported that she's been followed, the detective said, irritation clear in his voice. She noticed Collins several times and called us. When we picked him up, he admitted you hired him. Mr. McVeigh, this is close to harassment, and if it keeps up, you could be facing charges. I'm just looking out for my kids. I couldn't care less about her, but my kids are another story. If that's an issue, I'll count on your department to make sure they're safe. It's not illegal, the detective admitted, though his expression was annoyed. But it's borderline. Why not try to talk to your ex-wife and work something out? Last time I tried that, I ended up in jail, I replied. They let me go with a warning, saying they'd be keeping an eye on me. I didn't mind. I hadn't hired Collins to be subtle, I wanted Jennifer to know she was being watched. The next guy I hired was even less subtle, a rough-looking biker who seemed pulled straight out of a Hell's Angels flick. He charged $30 an hour and worked 3 hours every 4th night. I knew Jennifer would get the message loud and clear. If she cracked, I'd finally have a chance to gain full custody of the kids and put my family back together. What do you want, Michael? Jennifer screamed into the phone one night, her voice shaky. I want you to choke on your own spit and die, Jennifer, I replied calmly. She hung up, stunned silent. Not long after, I was sitting on my porch when the police arrived. You're late, I said, waving them over. Jennifer was accusing me of threatening her life, but I'd already given my lawyer the heads up, and he was waiting for me at the station. My client expressed a wish, not a threat, he told the officers smoothly. They tried to argue that Jennifer felt threatened because of the surveillance, but my lawyer held his ground. There's no law against hiring someone to keep an eye on things, he pointed out. Unless you have a recording of Mr. McVeigh making a direct threat, you have no case. Mr. McVeigh, why don't you just move on? She left you, it happens, one officer said, his patience wearing thin. If she snaps and harms someone, we're holding you responsible, another officer warned. I turned to my lawyer. Is there any way to end this? My client just wants his kids back, my lawyer said. If Mrs. Kelly relinquishes custody, he'll back off. That's for the court to decide, the officer replied before finally letting me go. On Sunday morning, as I was reading the paper over coffee, the doorbell rang. It was Jennifer's parents, dressed for church. "Can I get you some coffee?" I asked, but they politely declined. "Michael," her father began, "we know what our daughter did wasn't right, especially after you landed in jail. But she's our only child, and we don't want any harm to come to her." "I'm not looking to hurt her," I replied evenly. "She made her choices, and now she's facing the consequences. I just want my kids. They're better off with me, especially since her life's spiraling out of control. I'd hate for them to suffer if something happened to her." They exchanged uncertain glances. "We'll talk to her, but you know how stubborn she is," her mother replied, trying to ease the tension. "That's where you're wrong. The woman I married wouldn't have cheated or turned on me like she did. Whoever she is now, I don't recognize her, except as my kid's mother. And I hope she meets a miserable end. I don't forgive, and I don't forget." They left soon after, and I felt confident they got the message. That Thursday evening, around 7 p.m., she showed up. I hadn't heard a car, so she must have walked over. I checked through the peephole and then opened the door. "Come in, Jennifer. Want a drink? Hemlock on the rocks." I joked as I shut the door behind her. "Very funny. You really are a jerk, you know that," she snapped back. I swung the door open, gesturing outside. "I think we're done here. Thanks for stopping by. I hope you have a short, miserable life." "I'm not leaving until we talk," she insisted, making herself comfortable in the living room. "Suit yourself," I said, pouring myself a glass of wine. "So, what brings you by?" "I still own half this house," she said, her voice tight, "minus what I've paid since the divorce. I want it sold." "What's it going to take to drop the price?" "An act of God," I replied coolly, "or you could cover the loss, with interest. I want you out of this neighborhood and out of my life." "That's never going to happen," I said, my tone final. "Do you hate me that much?" she asked, her voice softening. "More than you could ever know," I replied. "It wasn't supposed to be this way," she began, sounding uncomfortable. "I never planned to fall for Nick. It just happened. Things don't just happen, Jennifer. You chose this," I shot back. "He needed me," she said defensively. "I fell in love with him because we needed each other." "What were you doing, charity work?" I asked sharply. "I needed you. Our kids needed you. Our marriage needed you. But you chose him over us. Now he's dead, and suddenly, he's not so needy anymore," I said with a smirk. "I only wish I'd been the one behind the wheel." "You've become so hateful, Michael," she said, looking at me with disgust. "Taking pleasure in someone else's misfortune is twisted." "I might be twisted, but you and Nick had a hand in making me this way. 60% of marriages end, but not all of them leave one spouse filled with hate," I replied coolly. "Don't you care about anyone else's marriage?" she asked, her eyes narrowing. "Not a bit," I said. "And while we're at it, how long was I played for a fool?" She hesitated, then finally answered, 5 months. "I almost told you after the first time. I was wrecked over it. But you didn't. You let it go on. How many times did you sleep with him in our bed?" "Never," she snapped. "I wouldn't do that." "So, it was fine anywhere else?" I shot back. "Our friends saw it and didn't tell me. Now I can't trust anyone." She sighed heavily, looking defeated. "Where do we go from here? This house is our last tie. What about the kids?" I asked pointedly. "I'm not giving them up," she replied firmly. "Tough luck. You're the reason I lost custody in the first place. If I hadn't gone after Nick's car, maybe things would be different. Now it's just you and me." Her face went pale. Are you threatening me? Me? Deprive my kids of their mother? I mocked. Never. But if something were to happen, I'd make sure they never forgot you. She stood, clearly rattled. I'm leaving. We had 12 good years, and I'm sorry it ended like this. As she leaned in to kiss my cheek, I stepped back. Don't touch me. You make my skin crawl. I'm sorry, she stammered. Don't be. I'm not, I replied, watching her as she walked out. When she reached the driveway, I called after her, you know, Nick had the same terrified look right before he died. Too bad I didn't snap a picture. She broke into a run back to her house. The truth? I'd been the one to start the fire at Nick's place. 2 Gatorade bottles of gasoline and a cigarette were all it took. I'd made sure no one was inside before slipping away. As for Nick's death, that was just plain bad luck on his part. But Jennifer and her family would always believe I had a hand in it, and that worked fine for me. Now, Jennifer was probably at home locking her doors, convinced she'd be next. But I didn't plan to touch her. I'd just keep feeding her paranoia bit by bit. Maybe one day, the kids would decide they'd rather live with me. The only silver lining to this entire mess was meeting someone new. Her name is Rachel, and she works for the State Department of Corrections. Part of her job was checking on me after my release, making sure I was adjusting. She's tough, no nonsense, and I respect that. When the formal check-ins ended, we got to talking and found we had a surprising amount in common. Once my probation wrapped up, we went on an actual date. I told her I had trust issues, and she admitted that in her line of work, almost everyone lies to her in one way or another. We're both working through our issues, getting to know each other slowly. Rachel's helped me see how holding on to bitterness was keeping me stuck in the past, blocking me from real life and genuine relationships. If you mess up and land yourself back in jail, I'll make sure it's my cell block you're assigned to, she told me with a smile that sent a chill down my spine. And you know what? I believe her. She's the kind of person I'd never cross, and it's a comfort knowing she'd never cross me either. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm ready to leave the past behind and open myself up to something real.